Hello and welcome aboard the Silverwind Humanity. My name is Captain Tom. I am joined by our co-host and producer Wilson, who happens to be an intergalactic robot, and we'll do most of the piloting today. So with that, today we're going to be talking about Genesis chapter 15, and this is all these chapters are important to the story, but this is a really pivotal one for understanding who God is in relationship to humanity, and especially this relationship that he has with establishing his own people, and he's starting to do that through this man named Abram, and that name will eventually change. I think we all know what it is, but before we get ahead of ourselves, we are going to go to another moon of Saturn, probably the last moon of Saturn we're going to go to. We'll go to a different planet next week, and it is Iapetus. So it's another wild, crazy, and unique moon. So let's go ahead and check that out. We're going to turn this music down a little bit. That was probably a little too loud for the intro anyways, so let's Wilson, let's go ahead and track our way over to Iapetus. Let's see here, make sure we do this right. So we're still gonna phase warp here. We don't want to warp drive because Wilson is probably gonna mess up the rings if he does that. So we had a close encounter before, so we want to try and avoid that. By the way, Julian, just some guy, welcome guys. Glad to have you on board. So let's I think this will work. All right, Wilson, let's cross your fingers. Wilson doesn't have fingers. That's okay. All right, let's here we go. I'm the only one with the superior hands. All right, we got that. This should get us there. Heck yeah, look at that view. This is Iapetus, everybody, and as you could tell, it is much further away from let's see here, we'll turn the music down. It's a lot further away than these other moons that we've been talking about with Saturn. So as you could obviously see, there's already something really interesting about its appearance, and it's been often called the yin-yang of our solar system. And it's half of this moon, this world moon, is covered in white ice. Half of it is covered in either Earth or that's beneath the ice or something like that, or no, it doesn't have ice right there, or it's some other substance on top of the ice. Now we do know that this moon is 2/3 ice, right? That's what's made up of. They could tell because they sent the Cassian spacecraft past Saturn and used some instruments to basically tell the density of a lot of these moons, and gives us a lot of information on exactly how much of it is water, how much of it is not water, and that sort of thing. So their best understanding of this is that it's 2/3 ice. That'll come up very importantly later. It is about 1/3 rock. And unlike last week, we talked about Rhea, which was a dirty snowball. The rock was kind of mixed in with ice, and it didn't really have a rock core like you would expect. And so this one probably has more of a rock core like you would expect in a normal moon. I didn't see anything otherwise. It's not known as a dirty snowball, so to speak. So what is going on with the surface of it then? If it is 2/3 ice, that means the top layer should be ice. Why is it black like this? And well, that's actually a big mystery for a lot of modern science and just people in general studying this stuff. So we've got, we could do let's do the far scene here. Let me make sure we're not flying around and warping anywhere. Here we go. There we go. You can see a little bit better. You don't need to see me as much. So so a few interesting things about this. So some of the ideas for why the surface is darkened like this, the first idea is very simple. The idea that there's some debris in the universe, it collided with it and just kind of painted the ice black. So that's one idea. Now this would have had to happen very, very recently because there's a lot of craters that look like they wouldn't be that old, and there's no exposed ice in those places. So it's kind of an interesting mystery right there. The other idea, because it's kind of hard to believe with the way that it's distributed on the face of it, that would be the case, right? So other ideas were formed to try and explain a little bit better. One of those is that Iapetus has volcanic activity, and these volcanoes spew, contents over onto the surface, and that is causing the blackness that you're seeing right here. Well, the problem with that is that, I mean, check out how far away it is from Saturn. It's very far away from Saturn, so it'd be very difficult to try and explain this in a materialistic, worldview, that the core is still active, right? I mean, these things are supposed to be billions of years old, and because they're not that large, because they're rather small, the cores would have cooled off, right? So these moons should be old, cold, and dead. That's what all the scientists said before we ever got to study these things up close. And as we see in a lot of them, that's not the case. And with this one, we don't see the volcanic activity. It's just a theory, right? But it could be an explanation. Now, maybe there is volcanic activity, maybe there's not. Who really knows, right? But there's a third one that is kind of the favorite theory on why this is the way it is. It's a little bit to explain. So as you could see, one of the differences between Iapetus and these other moons were pretty much in orbit right there with the rings. So when we were at those, you could barely see the rings because we're kind of level with it. Well, with this, it has, so maybe this is the best way to see this. So if you have the Saturn right here and all of its moons, just say that's its ring, and they're all kind of orbiting in line with it, Iapetus does this, right? It has this orbit that goes really high and really low. So we're actually at a really high moment in its orbit. So you're looking down at Saturn. It's of all the moons, it has the best view of all the moons of Saturn, right? So you get to see the rings a little bit better and that sort of thing. But it's also really, really far away. And first off, it's such an odd moon, right? The idea this is the only moon, the big moon like this, that is orbiting at a wonky angle like that. The fact that we even be captured in that kind of gravitational pull is a huge mystery by itself. But it has it takes a long time for it to get around Saturn compared to the other ones. It's got a lot further to travel, which means that on one surface of it, the front side is the blackened side, the back side is the icy side. So the one idea is that there was maybe a meteor or something that hit it at one point in time, covered up the ice a little bit, and then as it's going around its rotation, it's being exposed by sunlight on that long side, and then it melts the ice, right? And then exposes a rocky surface, right? Well, the only problem with this is that the median temperature of the surface of this moon is somewhere a little over negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty typical for a celestial body. But then there is, it does warm up. The darker side does warm up, and their best understanding of evaluating it and figuring out the temperature is at about 100 degrees. It gets about 100 degrees warmer. So the excuse that it warms up enough for the ice to melt doesn't really hold up when you're going from negative 300 degrees to negative 226. Negative 226 is still very much frozen. So all of these ideas essentially kind of fall apart from strictly a materialistic perspective. But wait, there's more. Let me show you guys some images here. Let's see. Got some stuff here to show you. This right here, actually, let's make sure we stay at a far view here. Perfect. So check this out. This is a close-up of this moon right here, and look at that. Around its entire equator, right at its equator, is this really weird bulge, this mountain range that just goes around the entire thing. It looks almost like the moon was just kind of squished down together, and in the middle of it just kind of like bumped out a little bit. It's very, very odd. It's a very difficult thing to explain. Now, one idea, and this is the best idea I was able to find both through NASA and other forums and stuff, is that when it was forming billions of years ago, when it was still soft, so to speak, because it's still had an active core, it squished down and just kind of got stuck that way. But 2/3 of it is water, right? So if 2/3 of it is water, well, why would if it got squished, why would it stay squished like that? Why would it freeze like that? The long drawn out period over billions of years really falls short in trying to explain this, and remains one of the really big mysteries, or one of the most mysterious moons in the scientific community, that or at least the moons of Saturn goes. So yeah, that's Iapetus for you. Let's see here. I got some chats right here. Glad to be here. Very, very nice. that theory of it melting the ice doesn't really hold water. Nice. Yes, a dad probably. That's very, very good. Okay, so yeah, I think we have talked about this a little bit. I wonder if there's anything else that I might be missing. I think that's it. By the way, Iapetus got its name. I don't really cover that. Maybe we'll cover it later more with the other moons as we revisit them, because we'll probably have to eventually. But this was one of the brothers of Kronos, Iapetus, in Greek mythology. So it's named after essentially a Greek mythological titan. So pretty cool stuff there. Let's take these things away. And then... yeah, well, we might as well. This will be our backdrop. Gorgeous scene here as we talk about Genesis chapter 15. So, Wilson, let's go ahead and take it away. I'll meet you guys back in the reading room. All right, so here we are back at a nice reading room here. The view is wonderful. I really enjoy it back here, so this is a better kind of perspective. But yeah, so let's go ahead and dive into the story here. Now we have a little bit to cover from last time. Last time there was essentially the First World War, if in this kind of ancient setting where King Karl de Lomer, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right. My pronunciations won't necessarily be very academic, but I'm going to try. Kedor Leomer, there we go. He basically united his kingdom along with 3 others to go after these 5 city-states that were causing problems, and then it focuses in on the result of that battle with Sodom and Gomorrah retreating, a lot of men falling into tar pits, and Lot got captured. Well, Abram wasn't really going to get in the middle of any of this until he found out that Lot was taken. That's his nephew, so now it's personal. And Abram got a little over 300 men, went after King Karl de Lomer and this world-ending army, because they went through zigzagging, burning everything. So we've got a nice little, let's see here. I want to make sure. Yeah. Look at that. I like visuals, so, here it is. So basically, the orange kingdoms went after these little purple ones, and they laid waste to most of everything in between there. And, this was one thing that armies would do back in the day, a strategy of, recouping your resources, getting supplies, getting wealth, right? You have to pay those men. And at this time, there's not necessarily like a very clear monetary system. Generally, you paid troops by the land that you took and the things they were able to get while raiding and that sort of thing. So they definitely laid waste to a lot of different people groups. And then we have Abram showing up. And when he does, with just a few men, he's able to actually beat this world-ending army. And obviously, this is a David and Goliath moment where God is helping Abram, and he essentially becomes a war hero, right? Defeats this army, but it's not like he defeated the kingdoms entirely. They could totally do something later and send assassins after him, or they could send another army directly to him, right? So now that he's kind of caused this attention on himself, there are some things to worry about in that regard. And there were other things that happened in that chapter. He got blessed by Melchizedek, a really interesting figure in the Bible, and then a very consequential one. And then we had the king of Sodom try to enrich Abram as well, and Abram rejected that because he didn't want to be enriched or allow an evil king to say that he took place in making Abram wealthy, right? So he rejected that offer. Now he doesn't owe anything to King Sodom, and he'd rather keep it that way because King Sodom is not necessarily a good guy. So, and he's very much aware of that. With that, we're going to go ahead and jump into chapter 15 here. So, ending off with that moment, we understand that Abram has a lot to be concerned with, and it kind of implies that concern and opens up with God responding to that concern that's going on in his own mind. So let's go ahead. We'll pick up right there, and let's get into it. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you and your reward will be great. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, what good are all these blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eleazar of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no descendants of my own, as one of my servants will be my heir. All right, so God is speaking to Abram in a vision, letting him know that, hey, you got nothing to worry about. I'm going to keep you safe, right? And your reward will be great. And Abram's response is, that's nice and all, but all these good things you're giving me, I'm going to have to hand over to someone who, you know, isn't actually of my own blood. It's like not going to be one of my descendants. And that's really bothering Abram. Like, he really wants to have a lineage of his own. He really wants to have his own children and his own son specifically to pass things down to, and you know, and have that kind of can't even think of the word right now, that kind of lineage, right? So so we'll see how God responds to that, because God has promised him things in the past about making a great nation from him, but Abram doesn't really know what that means yet. Does God mean he's going to make a great nation through, like, my household, who I pass this down to, or what's going to be the deal here? He doesn't know how God is going to actually answer these things. And, you know, that goes to, you know, Abram's credit when God called him out to go to a foreign land and said that he would give that land to him, make a great nation out of him. He believed and he followed. And this is why he's considered a great man of faith. Not a perfect man. We've seen that as well. So he's got a concern, and let's see how God addresses it. All right. Then the Lord said to him, No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. All right. So pretty clear. It does say that he leads them outside, probably just, you know, this is all part of a vision, right? God's not actually literally there in that way, in like a physical presence. But yeah, I mean, he's making a promise, very specific now. It's like, hey, this will actually come from you, and your descendants will be like the stars in the sky. So that's also kind of problematic, because he's to the point now where him and his wife are getting up there in age and well beyond childbearing years. And it's almost like, well, if that was the plan, God, like, why didn't you make this happen sooner, right? So let's see what Abram's response is to this, because you could easily find yourself in a position where, like, yeah, Lord, but, and proceed to try and talk back to him. And some people do that in the Bible, right? Moses is very famous for trying to, you know, give a bunch of rebuttals. But we have, yeah, let's see how Abram responds here, and we'll talk about that a little bit. All right. So that's how many descendants you will have, said the Lord. But, and Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. Then the Lord told him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession. All right. So, yeah, he believed, and this is actually a really, a very clear part in the Bible when it talks about God's grace. Yeah, it's a very clear picture of that. So what is grace? Grace is basically giving someone something that they don't deserve. And so it's not saying that Abram was such a great man of faith and had such great deeds that he was counted righteous because of those things. It doesn't say that. It says that simply because he believed, not the war that he fought, the great heroic deed he did there, or, you know, having all the different things that he's done, just the fact that he has gone to this foreign land, all these different things, it was simply on the fact that he believed what God told him. Based on that alone, God counted him as righteous, even though technically that didn't earn him righteousness either. So this is a picture of God's grace in the Bible, and that will come up a lot. So Abram is not necessarily worthy of it, of himself. God is accounting it to him. And yeah, and that works very consistently through the whole story, and how God essentially counts people as righteous. So And yeah, with that, he says that he brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans. And this is a good reminder here that Abram was in a pagan land, worshiping pagan gods, and God called him out of it. It wasn't like Abram was, meditated and came across this great idea and just worshiped the Lord on his own, and God saw him as being like super spiritual and super great, and was like, man, I gotta like bless this guy and give him some land. It's like, no. God isn't giving him land or going to give him any descendants because of anything he did to reach out to God. God did all the work to reach out to Abram, to call him out of a sinful place and to bring him into a promise of becoming essentially the father figure to the people of God, right? So that's very important to remember as well. No part of this did Abram do anything that made God, say, well, I've got to do something good for him. No. All of this is grace, right? So that's very, very good. So it reminds him of where he came from. So let's go ahead and jump into this next segment here, because it's going to get really wild after this. So hang with me here. It's going to be good. But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it?" The Lord told him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. So Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. Okay, well, if you're not very familiar with the customs of this time, that's going to come across as really weird. So basically, God tells him to get a bunch of these animals, and so he sacrifices them and then cuts them down the middle, and puts their halves on either side, and essentially is forming like a path between these carcasses. Now, what they're doing here is this was actually, and there are other places in the Bible that reference this ritual, if you will. And so I'm not sure it's outside the Bible, but the idea is that it's to make a covenant, make an agreement. Now, today, you could write up on a contract and you have an entire legal system to back you up if you make a contract with someone and they violate that contract, right? So, but in ancient times, they didn't have a legal system or any of these other things to do. Basically, in order to make a contract, and this is actually a very serious contract. There are all kinds of different contracts they made in those times, but this was a contract to say, hey, we're both gonna, essentially what would happen is that two people in that contract would walk down between the carcasses of these slain animals, and they would agree, they would recite the contract, the covenant agreement, and then at the end of all that, if someone broke that covenant, their life was forfeit. The idea was, hey, you see these dead animals here, your life is as good as theirs, right, if you break this contract. So it's kind of like signing a contract in blood. It's a very serious contract with very serious consequences for breaking it. So God is setting up this moment to make a contract, and Abram's doing the work to put these things out there. And then the vultures coming and trying to mess up the carcasses is usually seen as like almost like a spiritual attack, like a manifested spiritual attack that's trying to disrupt this thing. And Abram fights to maintain this, place to do a contract with God. And and he's waiting for God to basically, show up, because he's got to walk with God down between these things to make a covenant normally, right? So let's see what happens next, because it gets even more interesting than that. All right. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction." sorry, I'm not even at the craziest part yet. So here's a vision where God is basically telling Abram the future. So this is pretty cool. He basically predicts right here that his descendants will be slaves in Egypt for 400 years, and with that, there's a reason for this. So the reason he can't take the land right now, and his descendants that may come here shortly can't take the land right now, as he says that the Amorites, who were among the Canaanites, right, that their sins were not full yet. So we talked about this a little bit when we talked about God cursing the Canaanites earlier on in the story. So God knew ahead of time what the Canaanites would get up to and all the bad things they would do. And instead of just saying, hey, I know this, if we were God, oftentimes we would go like, well, we know that someone is going to do a really bad thing, so how about we make sure that never happens? You get rid of them ahead of time or something like that. You see time travel movies that try to do things like that. The idea is, if you could travel back in time, would you try to get rid of Hitler before he could grow up and become the evil dictator that he became? And it's one of those moral questions, right? Do you punish someone for something that they're going to do in the future? And so we see God's character here. He knows the future. He knows what the Canaanites will do and what they'll eventually become, but he doesn't go in to punish them until they actually get to that point. And so this is basically a view of God's grace as well and his mercy. He's not quick to judge and that sort of thing. And he's going to wait until the generation that deserves that punishment has arrived, basically, where the Canaanites, they said the Amorites, right? The Canaanites, Amorites, these people would eventually go full pre-flood. We talked about that before. And that's when God is going to draw the line and give their land over to Abram's descendants. And so that's what's being predicted right here, which is actually a really cool thing to see about God's character and how he deals with sin and how he sees it. And he's giving them time to repent. And of course, because he knows the future, he knows they're not going to. But he's going to wait until the moment is right, until their sins are full. Basically, there's nothing else good in society. We talked a little bit about what they would eventually get up to, but it's we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves in the story. Basically, it's really bad stuff. It basically becomes a society, a lawless society of, rape and murder and all these different things. And so, God puts it into it through the Israelites when we get to that point in the story. So that's everything he's predicting right now, but he's not going to give over that land until it's time to do so. So that's his vision. And then we get another really interesting thing right here. So, sit back, relax, because this is going to be, you might want to put your thinking cap on this one because it's pretty interesting. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking firepot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River, the land now occupied by the Kenites, Kenzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphites, Amorites, Canaanites, Gershites, and Jebusites. And that is the end of that chapter, but not the end of talking about that chapter. So, so basically, God's confirming he's given this land, but there's this really interesting scene here that doesn't have any direct answer anywhere in Scripture of what these symbols mean. But we have a smoking oven, essentially, and a flaming torch, and those things side by side are now passing between the carcasses. Notice who isn't going down and passing through the carcasses in this covenant, and it's Abram. So he's making a covenant with Abram, but he's not putting him under the legal obligation that breaking that covenant would be involved with, right? So if Abram, typically, I'm sure Abram was expecting to walk down there with God, but God doesn't let him do that. And so God is basically making a covenant with himself that he's going to do this for Abram. So Abram doesn't have to meet a certain standard, measure up in any specific way. His descendants don't have to measure up in any specific way, because essentially the moment that they chose to, worship other gods and turn their back on the covenant, if Abram walked down there with God, that means that God would have to destroy them, right? Which is the terms of the covenant. But he doesn't do that. And so God, very mercifully, very graciously, understanding that people aren't good enough to measure up, he decides to make the covenant with himself that he's going to do all these things for Abram and establish these people for him. So the symbolism of the smoking oven and the flaming torch. In order to understand symbols in any piece of writing, but in the Bible is a good place to talk about this. If the literature doesn't specifically tell you what it is, then there is a way to kind of critically evaluate like what symbols mean. So we're going to do a little thought exercise here. So this is a phrase that's not from the Bible, although the Bible will probably agree with part of this. So there's this phrase, an interesting one, says the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Oh, what is that talking about? Well, the way you figure out what it means is, what is an emperor? An emperor is a king of kings, right? It's an authority over other authority, which means it's the absolute authority. And so what is ice cream? Well, it's food. You eat it. But why do you eat ice cream? You don't eat it for nutrition. You eat it for pleasure, right? Like that's the only reason you eat ice cream. So that saying, the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream, means the thing that ultimately rules people's actions is the pursuit of pleasure. And so that's what that phrase means. So if we use that same kind of reasoning here with the smoking pot or the smoking oven and the flaming torch, well, what is a smoking oven used for? Well, it's for cooking, right? Well, why do we need to cook things, right? Why don't we just eat things raw? Because we need to both purify the food that we're eating, being through the hot temperatures, and to make it palatable. There are plenty of things like potatoes are a good example of this. They're not very palatable until you cook them, right? Raw meat is very, very much the same way. Eating too much of that can make you sick. So cooking it purifies it. So we have those two symbols right there. Then we have the flaming torch. Well, what do people use torches for? To light the way or to light something on fire and destroy it, right? Torches are kind of used for both of those things. So we see here, and I think there's no right answer in this. It's just my attempt to kind of look at the symbols here and see what it might be that the scripture is trying to tell us about God here, or at least what God is trying to show to Abram, and that's that he is going to he's going to purify, right, and make his people palatable to him. The reason that people aren't palatable, God, is because of sin. So God is going to do something to resolve that sin, to make them palatable to him, and to purify them morally and spiritually and that sort of thing. Additionally to that, God will light their way, just like you would with a torch, and he's also going to be the destructive force on their behalf, right? So when there are battles that need to be fought and things like that, that God will fight those battles for them. And God will basically empower them in that way, that God will destroy their enemies. And I think that's a very reasonable thing to assume about what God is promising through these symbols. And maybe other people come up with different ideas and that sort of thing. That's mine right there, just based on, dissecting what those symbols are generally used for and what God might be trying to communicate with that. And those things would actually be very consistent with scripture and consistent with this story as a whole and how God deals with his people. So and with that is the end of that chapter. A covenant has been established between God. Like think of this for a second. God, the one who created everything, stars, all these planets and moons and things like that. This entity, this being, is making a covenant with this lowly dirt creature human that he created that is subjected to a broken life and a broken world because sin entered the world and separated him from his creation in that way. And so, yeah, it's pretty wild to see that not only is that he's not requiring anything of Abram. Abram doesn't have to do his part. He doesn't have to meet God halfway. It's very much God saying, listen, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to do all the work here. All I ask you to do is just simply have faith, simply believe. And it's not a blind faith. I mean, clearly it's not a blind faith. God has revealed himself to Abram. He's asking him to just believe. And to Abram's credit, by and large, for the most part, he does. There are moments of weaknesses he's had in the story so far, and there may be moments of weaknesses he has in the future. But he is called the father of faith for a reason. So yeah, with that, I think we'll wrap up the story right there. Head back over to the front with a quick little transition scene and get us back home. So if you got any questions or anything you want to bring up or talk about, that sort of thing, by all means, put it in the chat. Put in the comments afterward if you're not watching it live. I would love to engage with you guys there. So anyways, see you guys back front. Back front is a word, Wilson. It's okay, whatever. Anyways, yeah, all right. So let's see here. Where are we at here? Okay, so we need to get back home. So the best way to do that is to warp out of here. Or probably, I don't know, is there a planet you guys want to go to next? Let's see. I think that should do the trick for us right now. There it is. Yeah, if there's a planet you guys want to see, that sort of thing, we might just go back to Jupiter and look at more of the moons there. Yeah, we got some great options out there. There's some cool stuff. Let's see here. But I gotta say, Iapetus is very interesting. Let's do this. Here we go. I think that should work. All right, yeah, we should be locked into place there. Perfect. So yeah, Iapetus. This is one thing I find really interesting. And so we've mainly covered the moons around Saturn, and there are other moons. There's definitely some, what I would call less of a moon, more like just satellites, like things that are the size of a bus orbiting there, and it's technically a moon. We're not going to visit every single one of those little things, but we covered all the major ones. And I think it's really interesting that they're all extremely unique. They're all very difficult to explain from a materialist perspective. And that's something that to consider, that when we hear things, and I pretty much got all my information from NASA, they would always bring up answers to these different questions by saying, well, that middle is sticking out because it was all molten once, and we know what molten rock does when you got pressure at its core. Maybe it was spinning really, really fast and just kind of bulged out the core right there. And then they just kind of gloss over some of the other facts that, like, it's mostly water. Like, that doesn't make sense. Or the idea, well, there could be volcanic activity there, but by their own admission, there's no way there should be a volcanic activity on something that far away from Saturn. Like, they don't have the excuse of tidal heating, even though there's other moons that are way closer than, like, Enceladus or Titan, which are clearly active moons, and they're cold and have no activity, right? Like Mimas. And so, like, they will come out with answers like they know what they're talking about, but there's always a lot of inconsistencies in the logic and reason. And a lot of that is not because they're dumb people, not at all. The reason for that is they have already settled on a worldview that says the only thing that exists is matter. And we know already from discussions in the first chapter that that violates logic and reason when talking about the Big Bang, right? There was clearly something that had to cause a Big Bang if matter always existed, or something had to create that matter. And the presence of information, we see that information can only come from an intelligent source. So that being the case, clearly some force that's outside of matter has to be an intellectual force and a creative force involved in things. And that's honestly what is most logical and reasonable. When you've rejected that entirely and all you're left is with a materialist foundation, it becomes very difficult to explain these things. Although the theist has a much easier time explaining, simply saying whether it's there for millions of years or billions of years or just thousands of years, it was put there that way and created that way by an intelligent designer who clearly has a personality, right? We covered a moon that was literally backwards, covered a moon that has geysers shooting out of it, covered a moon that clearly had tectonic plate activity, even though there was definitely some issues with it being able to ever do that. And then we have, this moon right here, where you've got a lot of weird things going on with it. And, that would be the personality of a creator, in my opinion, especially the same one who created the platypus would definitely do things like that. So anyways, that can also be, that is also equally a valid proposal of ideas, and it's left out of many intellectual discussions, which then you have to question how intellectual those discussions are when they invalidate things that they cannot reasonably or logically invalidate. So, yeah, how far out can you go? Now, that's a great question. So actually, Wilson, is there even really like a limit? I don't know. We can definitely go outside of the the solar system and the galaxy. We've gone to a different galaxy on the Friday show once. So yeah, I don't know if there's a nebula out there, or like a constellation, or you just want to see twin stars or something like that, or a black hole. We can't get too close to those, but you know what I mean. We could definitely see anything like that. So once again, put any suggestion you like and where you'd like to go and what you'd like to check out. We could also do that as well. We're kind of staying in the solar system for the most part with the Wednesday night show. It's just easier to plot a course there and, kind of make sure everything's good and it's a little bit more predictable. Things get a little weird when you get outside the solar system, just so you guys know. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of dark matter and dark energy is the idea of the expansion of the universe. Dark matter is an idea proposed because the rules that we see existing within our solar system stop really getting applied too well outside the solar system. So things get kind of weird out there. It takes a little bit longer to plan those things out, but we could definitely go and see whatever you guys like. So just let me know. With that, you guys have been great. Appreciate you guys. I'll see you next Wednesday for sure. And yeah. We're looking to get more people on board tell anyone who might be interested in learning a little bit more about the Bible, at least understanding it. Not here to preach, not here to do anything like that. Just provide a space so people understand what the Bible says, that worldview. And, that only empowers anyone involved, right? And this is the book that changed the whole face of the world through Western civilization. I got to say, it's made the world a much better place than it was, before it existed, right? Things like mercy were not just given, moral concepts before the spread of Christianity, and this story specifically, a story that, unlike any of these other stories, where we see in trying to think of the name of it, the oldest story written, can't think of it right now. Epic of Gilgamesh. You see things like Epic of Gilgamesh or Greek or Norse mythology, or really any of these things, Egyptian mythology. You look at all these other different religions, and the gods are always playing games with mortals, right? They're like the most petty people that you can imagine. Like if a human being had power and just did really petty crap, like that's how they describe their own gods, right? And so in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you had Gilgamesh's best friend is killed because Gilgamesh stood up to the gods and said no to a goddess who wanted to forcibly marry him. And he said, no, you did horrible things to your past husband. Why would I want that? And in her anger, she wanted to get even with him. That's the kind of stuff you get really in any other kind of mythos or writings that talk about deity, right? Uniquely, this story right here with Abram and his encounter with God stands very much apart from that. God is not doing petty things. He is not, throwing tantrums or anything like that. Everything is measured. Everything is consistent and is outside of what typically people would naturally want to do, right? Which does give it credit to being something that wasn't just made up. So it's it's a really good, interesting story. And, I think we all benefit from knowing it better. So invite people into this space. Everyone obviously is welcome. And with that, I think we'll end our time for now. So anyways, appreciate you guys. I got a little, I think, you know, one of the songs done before, Stars in the Sky. It's one of my favorite ones. So yeah, let's hit that outro, Wilson.
I got lost tonight under the stars up in the sky. Directions hard to find under the stars up in the sky. I got lost tonight under the stars up in the sky. Directions hard to find under the stars up in the sky. I don't know where to take this, I don't wanna break this. We're living in the moment, we're living in the moment. Your head is on my shoulder, but we're getting older. Baby, it's you and I. Yeah, we're stars in the sky. Oh, you and I. Yeah, we're stars in the sky. You see that you're leaving me, the same thing you said last night. You can't do it peacefully, you won't go without a fight. So when I go, I know you'll follow me. I don't want slamming doors, no, just wait and see. You'll feel it naturally, there's no one else I see. I know you'll follow me. I don't know where to take this, I don't wanna break this. We're living in the moment,